In a moment that sent ripples across the global media landscape, Ibrahim Traoré, the bold and outspoken leader of Burkina Faso, took to the stage to address a growing concern that has long haunted the African continent: the manipulation of truth by Western media. Standing firm before an audience of journalists, students and dignitaries, Traoré launched into a scathing critique of how Africa is portrayed to the world. His voice unwavering, he declared, "We are recording every lie you tell about Africa." With those words, he exposed decades of misrepresentation, stereotyping and intentional distortion that have shaped global perceptions of Africa in the minds of millions. Traoré spoke of headlines that never showed Africa's strength or growth, but always its pain, conflict, and chaos. He pointed to reports that frame African leaders as dictators the moment they reject Western interference. "They don't fear our failure," he said. "They fear our independence." His statement struck a nerve across the continent. "You hear, Western media's selective storytelling," he explained, "was not just harmful, it was strategic. It's about control. Control of the narrative. Control of perception. Control of the truth." Traoré made it clear this system of narrative warfare would no longer go unchallenged. With passion in his voice, Traoré revealed that his administration had launched a media intelligence team tasked with archiving and analyzing false reporting. "We are building an archive of deception," he said, holding up physical copies of biased articles and manipulated broadcasts. "This will not be forgotten." His tone was not one of censorship, but of resistance. Resistance to the centuries-old strategy of silencing Africa by shaping how it's seen. The audience listened, some stunned, some proud, as Traoré called for every African to become a guardian of truth in the battle of narratives. The speech gained traction online almost instantly. Across social media, African youth flooded timelines. With clips of Traoré's statements praising his bravery and clarity, many users pointed out how major outlets have repeatedly ignored African victories like local innovation, Pan-African unity, or grassroots development efforts. Instead, these stories are buried beneath headlines about coups, poverty, or extremism. Traoré said, "They reduce us to tragedy because our triumphs scare them." It was a chilling line, one that captured the raw frustration of generations, tired of being invisible unless in crisis. Traoré made sure to mention that African nations were not waiting on foreign validation anymore. "We are not looking for your approval," he said. "We are reclaiming our story." He criticized how African peacekeepers are overlooked, how African economies are painted as doomed, and how any resistance to exploitation is spun as instability. With conviction, he added, "You call it a failed state when we stop obeying, but we call it freedom." It was more than a speech. It was a confrontation with centuries of colonial mentality repackaged as journalism. He also touched on education and how textbooks written far away from Africa distort its history. "They teach our children about Africa's slavery, but never about Africa's resistance," he declared. Traoré insisted that media and education go hand in hand in the war of perception. If Africa doesn't tell its own story, someone else will, and they'll twist it. That's why his government has pledged to fund local media, support cultural storytelling, and uplift young African voices who can challenge stereotypes not just with anger, but with facts, pride, and vision. Following the speech, reactions poured in from across the continent. Leaders from Mali, Niger, and Guinea expressed solidarity, and African journalists applauded the call for media sovereignty. Western outlets responded defensively, some accusing Traoré of threatening press freedom, but the African public saw through it. "Freedom of press does not mean freedom to lie," Traoré had said. His words resonated far beyond Burkina Faso. This was not about silencing criticism, but about demanding dignity, truth, and respect in how Africa is covered, something long overdue. In his closing remarks, Traoré made a vow. As you speak about us, we will speak about you. As you archive lies, we will preserve truth. The message was defiant yet hopeful. It wasn't just about revenge or rebuttal. It was about rising from invisibility, rising from manipulation, rising with a voice that is authentic, loud, and African. The crowd rose to its feet, applauding not just a president, but a movement. Traoré was speaking for every African who had ever felt misrepresented, ignored, or reduced by a media lens that saw only shadows. Days after the speech, youth groups began launching local initiatives to fact-check international stories about their countries. A university in Ouagadougou began compiling a student-run media review journal focused on global coverage of Africa. The impact was immediate and inspiring. It was proof that words matter, and that truth, once awakened, spreads like fire. Traoré's boldness lit that fire, and his challenge to the media was not just a warning but a promise. The era of one-sided storytelling is over. A new narrative is rising from the ground up. Ibrahim Traoré's explosive message to Western media is more than a headline. It's a historic shift in the way Africa confronts global bias. By exposing the lies, empowering African voices, and refusing to accept the old narrative, Traoré is leading a new generation toward media liberation. His declaration, "We are recording every lie," echoes like thunder through every newsroom and classroom. Africa will no longer be spoken for. It will speak for itself, with pride, with power, and with purpose. And this time, the world will have no choice but to listen.